Welcome. This is Power Trading Radio Live, fueled by Online Trading Academy. For more information, visit powertradingradio.com. Now, here's your host, Merlin Rothfeld.
Yeah, you used to have me Ben Franklin.
Hello, everybody. This is John O'Donnell sitting in for Merlin. Merlin's taking a little personal holiday today, but I went out and tracked down a new resident of Orange County that just moved to Tustin, California. It is Dr. Mark Skousen, and this is his new newsletter, the 40th anniversary. Yeah. Wow. A new decade, and who has 2020 vision? Amazing, Mark. I can't believe it's been 40 years.
In fact, as I tell my students, I started my newsletter the year the greatest president of the 20th century got elected. So who would that be?
Ronald Reagan.
That's right, Ronald Reagan.
I remember that.
That's right.
I remember when I had you on as a speaker at the first international teleconference that we did. Did we do it from the Bahamas?
We
did it from the Bahamas, the Cayman Islands?
I think it may have been the Cayman Islands, yeah. Was Sir Harry Schultz there?
No, Sir Harry, but Bob Bleiberg was.
Bob Bleiberg.
Ken Gerbino.
Ken Gerbino. He's still around.
Oh, Ken's still around.
Yeah.
Mark and I go back probably to the mid-'70s. My back thought would be, Mark, we probably met at a Blanchard conference or a Charlie Gittler conference.
Yeah.
But going back to around the mid-'70s, wouldn't that be about right?
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
And you were just kind of getting started with your newsletter.
Yeah, I was a young, little blonde-haired kid.
Well,
when I had hair.
That could happen. You got the John O'Donnell haircut, though.
Oh, yeah.
There, you know what I'm saying?
It's pretty cheap.
Yes, it is. Cuts down on the wind resistance as soon as you get out of the shower, right?
Yeah.
Okay, Mark, first of all, tell us a little about your newsletter. And do you have any, before we get into what's going on in the economy today, tell me a little bit about what's going on with Freedom Fest. Mark is also the producer of the Libertarian Extravaganza in New Orleans every year, known as the Freedom Fest.
Vegas, not New Orleans.
I'm sorry, Vegas. Yeah. My mind's getting warped here.
Although I'd like to do it in New Orleans, but
that would
Vegas.
Be fun. That would be fun. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what you got up for this year?
Yeah, so we've been doing it since 2007, and Freedom Fest is the world's largest gathering of free minds, libertarians, conservatives, anyone who's willing to look at both sides of the issues and hopefully choose the right side of the issue, that whatever the best solution is, rather than labeling someone. We try to steer away from labels and just focus on best solutions. And we always have big name speakers. We've had William Shatner before. We've had George Foreman one time. Kevin O'Leary last year. He was fantastic. Mr. Wonderful. And this year we have Dr. Jordan Peterson, who is New York Times says he's the most influential public intellectual in the world today. Very controversial clinical psychologist, written a book called The 12 Rules of Life for Life, and he's encountered a lot of controversy, so we look forward to having him. But we have Tom Woods coming. We have Lord Matt Ridley from the UK. It looks like we're going to have Senator Rand Paul coming, he and his wife. We'll probably have quite a few political people because our conference is exactly the same time as the Democratic National Convention in Milwaukee. Mm-hmm. So we're going to be the counterpoint to all the socialism that you hear in democracy, and so among the Democrats. So if you want to get away, come to Vegas, July 13th through the 16th. That's when we're planning to have our big show. We'll have over 2,000 people there.
How can our audience find out how to reserve a seat for that event? And I assume you got some kind of an early bird special.
Yes, as a matter of fact, it's $399. Are you out of your mind? $399 is our special price. We already have 554 people. I never exaggerate the numbers, by the way. A lot of conferences say they have 2,000 people there, and then you go in the audience and there's 300 people showing up. But we actually have 554 people who have already signed up so far. We're 40% ahead of last year. So we're really quite excited. But anyway, if people go to freedomfest.com, that's the place to look. And you need to sign up before March. That's when our early bird ends, and it'll go up by another $100. And for those who are subscribers, I don't know if you wanted to mention this right now, but those who subscribe to my newsletter, subscribers who come to my newsletter, as a thank you for people who have supported me and followed my advice, they'll get a free copy of The Maxims of Wall Street, which is the new 7th edition that just came out, and it will be autographed and numbered. And then they also receive an American Eagle, 2020 American Eagle silver dollar. So I'm giving out of my own pocket for everything what people have done for me. If you subscribe to Freedom Fest and you come to Freedom Fest, you'll get a silver dollar and you get an autographed copy, numbered copy of my book. So I think it's going to be a real. We'll probably have several hundred people there just for my reception and conference.
Let's look at that other book that you brought, because this, of all the books you've written, Mark, and I've read every book that you've e-published. What I call e-published at Kimball. This is my favorite book.
Really?
Of all the books that you've done, and you've done a ton, and some of which are including textbooks. We'll talk a little bit about economics in a moment. But the title of this book is A Viennese Waltz Down Wall Street. And what I really enjoy is it's the Austrian economics perspective for investors.
Yeah.
And you've done, and what it is so delightful about reading this book is you go through some of the cast of characters in the whole hard money movement.
Oh yeah.
Back from the 70s and you
Harry Brown, Murray Rothbard, Howard Ruff,
Jerome Smith,
Jerry Smith.
Yeah, wow. You blend all that together with Murray Rothbard and Mises and Hayek, and and first of all, you're a very clear, distinct writer, and you write in a tone and a style that people like me who aren't professional economists can comprehend your message as the author. And so of all the books you've written, it's called The Viennese Waltz Down Wall Street. I'm sure you can get it on Amazon.
Well, actually, the book is difficult to get on Amazon.
Really?
I have purchased all the copies of this book. So if people want it, they go to skousenbooks.com.
All right.
Skousenbooks.com, and they can get it for like $20.
All right. Well, let's get into the economy. We have markets here. We're starting to have a little sell-off here at the first of the year.
Yeah.
And the biggest since we've had in January of last year. And a lot of that seems to be built around some of the earnings are coming in a bit flat. And secondly, of course, we have the coronavirus. You've got contacts all over the world, and through your newsletter, you make some very specific recommendations on securities to have engagement with. What's your feeling about this coronavirus, and how intense can this get?
Well,
from your perspective.
Yeah, when I was writing this 40th edition, 40 years of forecasts and strategies, I was trying to think, because I have had some pretty good calls over the years, and one of them was the very bottom in my March issue of 2009. That was the very bottom of the market. I had a meeting with Jeremy Siegel, and he convinced me this was the bottom of the market. So a lot of times it's who I meet and who I'm talking to at the time. So as I was preparing this 2020 edition, 40th edition, the whole idea of who has 2020 vision, and there's an old saying which I quote in the Maxims, in the land of the blind, the one-eyed is king, because nobody has a perfect 2020 vision. Nobody has a perfectly clear crystal ball.
Right.
Except maybe an Old Testament prophet. And but I do think you need to know the signs of the times. And my feeling is that the market is at such high levels, there had to be a black swan event that's going to happen this year or sometime soon. And with the markets, you're showing this graph here.
TJ, let's show this chart while Mark's explaining his perspective.
Yeah, so with the markets really, in many ways, at relatively all-time highs, they're there often is a black swan event. Now, what would be that black swan event that could cause the market to finally correct 20% or more? We've come close several times. December of 2018 is the last one. And, you know, I'm thinking in terms of Middle East turmoil, Iran, something may be happening there. I'm thinking of Fed policy that suddenly decides, well, for example, last September, the repo rate jumped to 10% overnight. Why? Because the government under the Trump administration did this deal with Congress, and they had to borrow so much money that the repo market ran scared, and they just weren't willing to handle all the Treasury securities that were being sold. So the Fed had to intervene. They had to buy $75 billion in assets in treasuries. They had to cut interest rates very quickly, unexpectedly. So what about an event like that could happen? And another possibility I thought was China, a trade deal, and a natural disaster. So I list all these things, and one thing I didn't list, and this is why it's a black swan event, right? It's suddenly another Asian flu virus like SARS that's coming out, and it's expanding rapidly. I am very impressed with how quickly we're moving on this, and we're quarantining people, and we're quarantining China. China's quarantined whole cities. We're stopping flights in and out of China. So this is temporarily negative, but imagine once it's resolved, the market will make a major recovery. So I don't necessarily say this is the end of the bull market, but the black swan event, this is the thing that we must always be ready. So I have a gold position. I added gold in December of 2018. I've had gold in my position, a conservative position of Franco-Nevada. But boy, that stock is up 50, 60, 70% since I've recommended it. So you've got to have a position like that because gold is by nature a hedge against a black swan event.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm not getting out of the stock market. I still have my position.
No, I got your point.
But I do think you have to have a hedge.
Well, speaking of black swan events, we don't see that black swan events impact your adjusted gross output indicator. You've been on the show a couple of times. You gave us a cursory view of how the gross output indicator came about. I know you've been a real champion for the disclosure of the gross output indicator, either as a supplement or a complement to GDP. Why don't you walk our audience, TJ, let's pull up this chart and just walk through where we are today on this gross output indicator, because in reading in your book about why it's important, my takeaway from that explanation was it gives us more transparency, especially into the production side of the economy.
Yeah, so I think for everybody in your audience who's very familiar with watching CNBC or other news outlets, financial statements that come out every quarter, like Amazon just came out with theirs, and Tesla and some of these others, I think the key is there's a top line and there's a bottom line to a financial statement.
Okay.
And so the financial statement has a top line, which is sales, and the bottom line, which is earnings. And for years, I've thought to myself, we need to pull out here?
No, just keep going.
Okay.
We're going to make a little adjustment. You just keep going.
Okay.
We're okay. Keep going explaining it.
Okay, so what I'm saying is the same thing needs to apply to national income accounting. And we've always had the bottom line, which is the finished product, what we have sales by consumers, business, and government, called GDP. We've always had that, but it's only the bottom line. It leaves out the supply chain. It leaves out most B2B spending, and that's what brings the finished product to completion. So why not measure that? And the blue line that you see on this chart, that's the change in GO, the change in total sales, total spending in the economy. It's it's more than twice GDP because it includes all kinds of stages of production in the wholesale, retail, and production and resource stage. When you add those all together, that gives you an indication of what's happening, business actually writing checks. And so it's an extremely important concept that I've been trying to teach economists. They're finally catching on. They're slow learners, but they're finally catching on that they too need a top line and a bottom line. So gross output, GO, is total sales, total revenues, total spending in the economy, and GDP is final sales, the finished product that you sell to final users. And it comes out quarterly. It's put out by the BEA, the Bureau of Economic Analysis, that puts out GDP. And you can see here's another figure giving you an indication how large the business sector is. The point that's really important about the gross output statistic is that it tells you what business spending is doing, because GDP is largely consumer spending. It's like 70% of GDP, but it's only about a third of gross output. So the blue line shows you how volatile gross output is in B2B spending. And you can see the collapse in 2008, how far it dropped. Look at that. While if you look at consumer spending, it just kind of leveled off, kind maybe dropped slightly. Yeah. So what is the business cycle? Well, it's B2B spending, and that's what you have to look at. Now, this chart goes to early 2019, so it's a little bit out of date, but the latest data shows that B2B spending has picked up quite a bit of speed. So we missed a recession. There was a lot of talk about recession. I looked at B2B spending in the supply chain. It was pretty clear to me we're not going to have a recession. But these black swan events, if they last very long, will create a recession. There's no question about that. I mean, how long is it going to take if this virus continues on for a couple of months? That will cause a recession because there's so much cutting back.
Well, it's an interesting point. I heard newsletter writer Bianco today on CNBC talk about what's different with this virus in China today. Does it matter versus what happened with SARS? And he made the point that when the SARS virus came out, GDP of China was about 4% of the global GDP. Today, GDP of China is about 16% of GDP.
Good point, yeah.
So if we have a significant quarantine for multiple months on this coronavirus, it's very impactful, not only on the consumption that takes place in China, but China is the job manufacturing workshop to the world, and they are the supply chain to the world for a lot of hard goods that are going to impact. Can you imagine what's going on at Starbucks? Can you imagine what's going on at McDonald's or Pizza Hut or some of these American or luxury brands like Tiffany on some of these goods that get sold into China?
Yeah.
And then think about the supply chain of the, again, you know, and these supply chains can't move overnight.
Yeah.
These are large, complex production cycles that just aren't going to snap your fingers and move. And this could have very significant impact. And what you're saying, I would assume, is that we're going to see that first.
Yep, we're going to see it
in
there.
the blue.
Yep.
We're going to, correct?
Yeah, the supply chain is the first thing. The first thing that happens in a recession is business slows down their spending for whatever reason.
CapEx.
And it's the same thing for the recovery. Business is the first to recover. So it is a leading indicator. The supply chain is a leading indicator. And you know, when consumers stop spending, well, the supply chain really slows down, as you can see right there. You can just have a little blip in the consumer consumption because people are still going to eat. They may not be going to the Starbucks as frequently, but they're still going to eat. They're still going to drink. That sort of thing is going to continue. But you're going to have a lot of these supply chains being affected by it. It's not unlike the hurricanes or other natural disasters, an earthquake and so forth. But it depends on the time. How long is this going to take? And if it takes a long time, it's going to have an impact. There's no question about it. It's that black swan event.
Would you say this perspective was brought to life, although it wasn't branded, the gross output indicator, but would you say this is a Hayekian principle?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact...
and therefore we have to give the Austrians credit for putting the light on this?
Well, yeah, and in a lot of ways, yes. In fact, it's, for those who are familiar with Hayek's macro model, it is a measure of Hayek's triangle, which is the stages of production, and you add value as you move toward final use. So it's a measure of all these stages of production, which is the Hayek model. And I've tried to make this point with GMU, George Mason, which is a big following of Hayek and so forth. And it's important to realize that this is a major triumph of Hayekian or Austrian economics. However, I would also say that it appeals to all various forms of economic schools. For example, William Nordhaus, who won the Nobel Prize 2 years ago, is a big fan of gross output.
Okay.
He argues, well, it's a form of aggregate demand, you see, because businesses are writing checks at all these stages of production. So there's a little bit for every school of thought, except maybe the Marxists. They may be a little out of it, but it's not just Austrian. It can be a supply side statistic because it is the B2B spending. It is the supply chain. It is somewhat, to some extent, a Keynesian concept because it's an aggregate toward total spending in the economy. There's lots of ways of looking at it that I'd hate to have this kind of statistic become a divisive, well, which school is it, and that sort of thing. It's something that everyone can use, and that's why the government is using it. Actually, John, this is restoring my faith in government because it's the government that finally agreed they were the first ones to finally respond and say, yeah, this makes a lot of sense, and we're going to start monitoring, we're going to start issuing or producing the gross output product every quarter. And I have some very good news in that respect. I just met Brian Moyer, the director of the BEA, and he told me that starting in September of this year, they're going to release GO and GDP at the very same time. So that's not unlike your financial statement that issues a top line and a bottom line in your financial statements.
How do you feel about the accuracy of the data that the BEA collects to create this index?
Well, it's a good question because it is a bit secretive. And same thing with GDP. What they do is a bunch of surveys with various corporations to try to get an estimate. And notice that in GDP they make 3 different estimates before they finally come up. But they're not that far off when they finish the product. They do leave out some stuff in gross output, which is technical, and I don't want to get into it in particular. But I am concerned about the data. It doesn't include black market activity. How do you measure that? It may not include, some of the wholesale and retail that trade that goes on and stuff. So there are some problems with the data. But at least you have a quarter-to-quarter look. They're using the same criteria, as bad as it might be, each quarter. And so the trend line is probably fairly accurate.
Wonderful. Mark, we got a few minutes left, and I would be remiss if I didn't ask you to retell the story about having dinner with Milton Friedman and Gary North in New Orleans. And this is one of my favorite stories of all time. And would you share that with our audience? Give the backstory on how it came about, the great Milton Friedman, you and Gary North, and I guess a couple of others sit down to dinner.
Yeah. Well, this was at the New Orleans conference in 1999. And Milton and Rose Friedman came at the invitation of Jim Blanchard to the famous New Orleans conference, which is a gold bug conference.
Yeah.
And so
it's where you and I met in the mid-'70s.
Yeah, exactly. And that was our beginning. My very first investment was a silver dollar, right? After I heard Harry Brown saying they're not making any more of these. So I thought, wow. And so it wasn't a stock or a bond, traditional investments, it was gold and silver. So so I took Milton and Rose Frieden out to dinner, and we went to Commander's Palace, which is the finest restaurant in New Orleans.
Right.
Just a beautiful place. We were on the second level. We had this wonderful dinner, and I had Van Simmons of David Hall Rare Coins there. I had Gary North there, and there was me, and then Rose and Milton Friedman. So there were the four of us sitting around the table. And I said, well, what brought you to New Orleans? And he said, why did you accept this invitation? Because he gets lots of invitations. He says, well, actually, the last time I was here, I had a heart attack. And Rose wanted us to come back here to make sure that it was not a heart attack, that you could survive and it wasn't a problem. So they were having this wonderful, pleasant dinner, and all of a sudden, Milton turns to me and he says, Mark, I just don't understand why you gold bugs are so passionate about gold. Why is that? And I said, well, I'll tell you what. So I pulled out of my pocket, I don't have it with me right here, but it's a $20 gold certificate. It was the paper money, $20 paper money like you see today.
That was redeemable for gold.
That was redeemable gold. And I said, let's read the contract. I want you to understand why we view the gold standard as a standard of sound money and honest money. What do we mean by that? I said, on this gold certificate is a contract between the holder of the banknote and the owner of the banknote. And what does it say? So we read together the statement. Here I'm giving a lesson to the foremost authority on monetary policy and monetary history. I'm aware of that. So he's well aware that I'm telling him something he already knows. But it says at the top, this certifies that there has been deposited in the Treasury of the United States of America $20 in gold coin payable to the bearer on demand. And I said, so
at $20 per ounce.
At $20, yeah.
Per ounce.
Per ounce, yeah. So for every one of these banknotes, they had a double eagle gold coin that if you went to the bank and you gave them the $20 coin, you could redeem it in a gold coin.
Yeah.
I said, so Milton, what is the contract today? Do you have a $20 bill? So he reaches in his pocket and dutifully pulls out his $20 bill.
A current 1999
Yeah, and I
bill.
said, what's the contract? It says Federal Reserve note, and it's a note that doesn't even pay interest. Milton, this $20 isn't worth the paper it's printed on. I have a $20 bill here, I'm sure. And so, I mean, yeah, here it is, $20. I'm not going to tear it up, but I tore up his $20 bill.
Yeah.
I tore it up right in front of him. That changed everything. He and Rose both become very upset and very emotional. And they said, Mark,
you're defacing the money.
No, it wasn't. Well, yeah, I suppose. But more importantly, he says, you had no right to destroy my personal property. To destroy my personal property. And I said, oh my gosh, I just wanted to make the point that this isn't, and I was trying to salvage this friendship that we had. Gary North and Van Simmons were sitting there just staring. They didn't say a word. They let me just sink right there at the time. So anyway, finally I reached in my pocket and I pulled out a $20 gold coin, a double eagle. Now this is a Mexican 50 peso, but you get the point. This was a double eagle. And I handed it to him and I said, you want your $20 back? And he says, yes, I do. So I handed him a $20 double eagle gold coin that was face value $20. And I said, here's your $20 back. Guess what? He said, I don't want it. And he pushed it back to me. He was really, I didn't know what to do. And finally, I reached in my pocket, pulled out one of my $20 bills, and I said, listen, would this satisfy you if I give you the $20 that I tore up? I'll give you my $20. And he says, yes, that would be satisfactory. Finally, it settled down, and then I pulled out the $20 gold coin again, and I showed it to him, and I said, Milton, look at the year of the coin. And he looked at it and said, and it had 1912, his birth year. And so I said, Milton, this was all a setup so that we could give you this gold coin to the golden Milton Friedman here at the New Orleans conference. And Van Simmons over here was the one who arranged for this very rare 1912 double eagle coin to give this to you. And so he kind of gulped, swallowed his pride a little bit, and he and Rose accepted the $20 gold coin. But it was really touch and go there for a while.
Wow.
And the next morning, I'll never forget it, Gary North comes up to me the next morning. He says, Mark, I listened in silence what went on last night. Didn't ever come to my support. But he said, and I thought all night long about what happened. He said, this is how I assess it. You and I, Gary said, you and I have an ideology of gold and sound money. Milton Friedman has an ideology of paper money. And last night, you attacked his ideology. I thought it was a very profound statement.
It's very insightful.
But it's interesting that Milton Friedman and I maintained our friendship, but never, ever did we discuss the gold coin incident again. But I will tell you, I keep in my wallet. This is my wallet. If anybody wants to meet me at Freedom Fest, and I will show you there is the $20, Milton Friedman's $20 that I tore up, that I keep in my wallet as a keepsake.
Wow.
For that experience. That is the 20 that I did, 1999. So that was
Wow.
what, 21 years ago that
Wow.
I've had this in my wallet as a memory of that incident. So I'm sorry I took so long to tell that story.
Oh, no, I wanted
but
to.
it really is an incredible story.
That's an amazing story.
Yeah, it really is.
And I'm glad
yeah.
you shared it with our audience.
Yeah.
Now that we have that recorded as well. We're talking with Mark Skousen. Mark, by the way, is professor of economics, the presidential fellow at Chapman University. He and his lovely wife Joanne is a new resident here in Orange County. Matter of fact, I didn't get a coin from Mark, but I got from Joanne some of her famous chocolate chip cookies.
Oh, yeah.
So I had a good day too. Mark, I want to thank you very much.
Hey, John,
And
my pleasure.
I've enjoyed our friendship.
See you at Freedom Fest.
I hope so, brother.
Okay.
I really hope so, because it's a wonderful event. If our listeners would like to take advantage of your newsletter offer, how do you suggest they, or your Freedom Fest offer, how should they contact you?
So what I recommend is they go to markskousen.com. That's markskousen.com. That's my newsletter, and you can subscribe for just $99.95. And I also, if you just go to that website, you can also just click on. I have my 5-page report, 40 years, my 7 lessons I've learned. You can find that on markskousen.com. You don't even have to subscribe to get that. But if you subscribe and come to Freedom Fest, which is only $3.99, you will get the 2020 American Eagle Silver Dollar, and you will get a numbered autographed copy of the 7th edition of the Maxims of Wall Street. So,
very good.
Plus, hearing Dr. Jordan Peterson and Steve Forbes and all the other great speakers. John, you'll be there. It'll be fantastic.
Yeah. We're looking forward to it.
I'm looking forward.
Last year, I believe it was, year before, we brought our whole Power Trading Radio team over there, and we had the opportunity to interview Steve Forbes.
Yeah.
We tried to interview you, but you were kind of busy. You get kind of consumed with that
That's
event.
true. That's true.
And Deidre McCloskey.
Oh, really?
And I believe we had Peter Schiff on as well. So it was a fun event for us to participate in. Look, God bless you. Good luck. Welcome
Thank
to
you.
the neighborhood neighbor.
Thank you.
Great to call you neighbor.
Yeah.
Okay.
It feels good.
Merlin will be back on Monday. By tomorrow, I'm going to be doing a workshop up at our Westwood office. Starts at 9:30 a.m. It'll run for about 2.5 hours. Please come to the workshop. You can contact the Online Trading Academy Westwood Center if you'd like to reserve a seat for that. It's free of charge. Look forward to meeting everybody. Peace.
Take care. Bye-bye.
We're out of here. Very good.
You're listening to Power Trading Radio Live. Watch the show live or on the archive at powertradingradio.com and YouTube. Or download the podcast from iTunes or wherever fine podcasts are downloaded.